In the first part of this podcast chat, I have three guests on the stage of the Carter Jonas Game Fair Theatre in 2023. They are deer experts Niall Rowantree and Martin Edwards, and Mark Russell from Carter Jonas, whose clients deal with deer management. My big problem, I'd like to start with you, Niall, is the 2 million number for deer in the UK. This sounds like a death sentence for deer. What basis do we have for thinking there are more deer now than there ever have been, as we are told?
I think that the whole deer issue is, I think it's very much tied into people's perception of climate. And it's easy for government and NGOs to connect deer and people that have an interest in deer to land politics and land reform. And a lot of this, particularly north of the border, started when I spent a bit of time on the board of the Deer Commission, let's put it that way. And the decision was then that we would look at the impacts of deer. And that seemed the most sensible way to decide deer numbers sort of nationally, particularly in Scotland. I think it holds true for the whole of Britain. Unfortunately, it didn't quite have the same meat and momentum. And we seem in the last decade to have swung heavily back to numbers. An awful lot of the numbers are based on population assessments from deer dung counts rather than actual numbers of deer, and that led to one direction of travel as to total numbers of deer. And then the other thing was deer expanding into new areas, and then a projection of red deer in the open range in the Highlands, which was used to create this picture of deer numbers increasing. What missed the story was the fact that, particularly in the uplands, sheep numbers had dropped drastically, climate had changed, we had milder winters. So truthfully, Charlie, yeah, there was an increase in deer numbers. But the calculation to get to where we get to 2 million becomes quite questionable. We looked at this in Scotland recently, and I think David and I have done some stuff on it. And if the projected population was correct, and we take away all the cities, roads and water, then approximately every field you drive past in Scotland, there should be 7 deer standing in it. And facts aren't backing that up. So the whole, but to get public attention, you use big numbers, you use dramatic expressions, you talk about climate loss, you talk about trampling, you talk about erosion, and suddenly an iconic mammal becomes public enemy number one.
We are talking about this as science, though, with a capital S. And Martin, I mean, Basque has, I think, sensibly, or perhaps not sensibly in this case, always stuck to the line that, science-led solutions are sensible. I'll come back to you, Neil, about this one. But Martin, where is Basque on the question of the massive numbers of deer at the moment?
The reality is, as Neil said, we don't know how many deer there are, and it is very difficult to estimate the population of deer on one piece of land. So
how do you make that clear to government? Because they're going to be saying, well, look, the scientists are telling us this number.
We are getting better, and there's new technology, so with thermal drone counts, we are getting much better at estimating deer numbers, but even then, it's only an estimate. It's not we don't know, and it's a snapshot in time as well, in that you may count a certain number of deer on one particular night or one day, and the next day it could be completely different. So it is an estimate, and it's, as Neil said, we should be looking also at the impacts that the deer are having and measuring the impact rather than trying to count the deer themselves.
Aren't deer numbers and deer impacts, aren't they correlatable?
To a certain extent, yes, but you've got issues, and certainly where I am in Hampshire, we got large populations of fallow deer, big herds of fallow deer, and they can be on you one evening, and then or they'll have sanctuary at night during the day on one property, and move onto your property during the night and cause all sorts of damage. So.
Can I ask the audience here, deer stalkers among you, who, broadly speaking, are seeing more deer or more deer impact on their ground? Any hands there? A couple of hands. Who are seeing fewer deer? Okay, so it's not universally accepted on the ground, but we're going with the science. Can I turn to you, Mark, just on the landowner's view? How do they feel about being told what to do with their deer?
Well, individual landowners do take different decisions, and that impacts on the way that we're able to manage deer over a landscape, and the government's thinking about landscapes and how we look after them is going to help us do some of that. But in individual circumstances, it's a question of what impact is there on your estate, and are you willing to accept that level of impact? And I mean, you had a divided number of hands there as to those people who are seeing a rising of impact and lowering, and that's probably to do with how that area has been managed over the last 10, 15 years. And so landowners are coming into the conversation, or more landowners are coming into the conversation because of this wider vision, the raising up the agenda of deer numbers and deer management in general, and the changing of emphasis of how we're being encouraged to manage the land. So they are concerned about it.
So what's a typical conversation with a landowner? Well, is it along the lines of, I saw too many muntjac in the field, I need you to do something about it, or are they a bit more structural about it?
Different people have different reactions, but it's much more nuanced than that. I don't think in the farming and landowning world it's quite as black and white as that. There are lots of different elements that come into that decision-making process, and some of those will be about the commerciality of it and the commercial impacts on what you want to achieve on the land, and other decisions will be made on a more emotional basis. So sometimes it is a gut reaction to what you saw yesterday, but more often than not, it's actually a much wider conversation with more stakeholders within that discussion.
I think we're going to talk a little bit now about what we are doing about it. Each, Basque, the estates, Niall, Broadleaf, Scotland, and perhaps towards the end of the discussion we'll get to what we think we should be doing about it. But Niall, on the what we are doing, can you just describe your business looking after estates from an environmental and a deer point of view? What do you do for estates in Scotland?
One of the things we try and get across, and to be honest, with country people, farmers, crofters, deer stalkers, gamekeepers, they're all pretty savvy people. I mean, they understand that landscapes go through periods of change. I mean, at one point, for example, 6,000 years ago, there were a lot of woodlands in Scotland. But there's an awful lot of area now that's peatland that it makes no real environmental sense, I believe, to dig that up to plant trees in it. In fact, it's negative. So a lot of the stuff we do for landowners, particularly like Cathy that works with us, is to go and look at habitats and look at the art of the possible. What can you do here that will make this land more productive, which will make it sequester carbon better, which will produce a woodland that's viable. So that's the background. And then anchor onto that your management. What do you want to do? And the thing with deer, and as we've rightly said a moment ago, it's about impacts. And what should govern the total number of deer is the impacts of the deer. So my concern is when government comes in, because they always come up with sweeping solutions to complex problems. And the idea in Scotland, for example, of having 8 or 10 per square kilometre maximum, there are some parts of the Highlands that wouldn't be enough to maintain the habitat in good condition. There are other parts that would be too many. So it's actually coming up with sensible management plans and then trying to maximise the benefit. We're seeing models developing now where government's spending millions of pounds shooting deer. When in this room and in this area, there's an army of people who are quite happy to be involved in harvesting a natural resource and consuming it themselves. So we try to recommend to customers how they can connect with the market better, both for their venison and their activities.
We're into the area of what should be done, but in the what are we doing, you are opposed to the idea of a standard deer per square kilometre idea, is that right?
I think, well, at the end of the day, it's illogical. I did a lot of work for the Forestry Commission in my career. I remember we were doing deer population assessments, and an awful lot of this is based on dung counts, and they would say the dung count indicates so many deer per square kilometre. To give you an example, the Sound of Mull, anybody that's been up there, one side of the Sound of Mull is a forest called Funerary. On the other side is a forest called Grulin. The dung decay rates in less than 3 miles were 4 months of difference. So in that short distance, you could have a variance in the deer population of 30%.
It is this problem of dealing with the countryside as a big green blob that occurs outside the M25, isn't it? And I hope we're going to develop this over the weekend at the Game Fair Theatre. Martin, what does Basque do by way of advisory for landowners? Do you do the same kind of thing as Niall?
Certainly not. We do advice to our members, and landowners are our members as well. A lot of what we're doing is for our members, and we've got 42,000 deer stalker members within Basque, we sort of deliver a lot of training. So the DSC 1, DSC 2 courses we deliver, and we're also trying to get opportunities for deer stalkers to get out there and get involved, and also trying to bring more young people into deer stalking and get more people into deer stalking.
So Neil's point about more people going stalking, I mean, we are seeing more people than ever before with FACs and with a desire to go deer stalking, and yet it doesn't appear to be having an effect on the deer population. There's something's going wrong in the middle there. What is that?
Some of it is the opportunity to get out deer stalking, and we're trying to open up opportunities for people to go deer stalking, and we all need to shoot more deer as well. So and part of that is we've got to improve the venison market to encourage people to shoot more deer.
So is it Mark's fault for not letting people onto his ground? Is that what it is? Mark, I mean, what are the problems for landowners allowing more deer stalking? Are they the block at the moment? Are they the ones saying we must not let people go deer stalking?
No, well, I think that's an interesting question in that as the deer stalking world changes over time, and I think there's a lot of legacy within this. You'll often find one farm within a landscape has one stalker that they've always allowed to stalk their land, and if that individual isn't keeping up with numbers on that patch, then it impacts on everything else around them. Whereas as group stalks come forwards and join farmers together and possibly do a more strategic and more planned job over the deer stalking within an area, then our ability to manage the deer becomes much better. So I think there's a real change over time as to how these things are happening.
There's one thing which I get asked a lot by deer stalkers, by all kinds of shooters, is how do I get permission? How do I get ground to shoot on? And you seem to be the key to that. You could make that happen for them, couldn't you? Or is it more complicated?
No, I don't think it's necessarily more complicated than that, but it's a good question. And I would say that possibly Basque is a good place to start, because they might put people in touch with individuals locally who actually organise group shoots and are involved in stalking. And the way in is not simply to think you're going to go and find a piece of land to do it yourself. It is to learn about the process, to learn about what happens with the meat after it's been shot, and actually get involved in the whole thing. So I'm personally a relatively new stalker, but I didn't come at it from the point of view of learning to shoot. I started off with, how do I butcher an animal once it's been shot? How do I then learn to gralloch the animal once it's been shot? Then backwards to actually shooting it. So as individuals, it's not about shooting. It's actually about understanding the whole process and understanding the food at the end and the reason that we're controlling deer at the beginning.
It sounds to me like you, on behalf of landowners or landowners themselves, want a level of assurance from the people they are using as deer stalkers on their land, that somebody who knocks up on the door, even if they're wearing a suit and tie, aren't necessarily going to get that bit of ground, that you want at least something like Basque insurance, or at least what are you after?
It's about the professionalisation of it. It's not saying can I shoot, it's how do I get into the licence, how do I get into the group. It's much more complicated. I'm sure those people in the room that do shoot understand that. From a landowner's perspective, it's often about getting that semi-professional help to advise on the management of it and the management plan.
So, Martin, for the sake of people in the room who are looking for stalking, looking for ground to stalk on, how does Basque help them get that?
So we run stalking schemes around the country, which give people the opportunity to get out stalking with, and quite often it's guided stalking, so then you get some sort of mentoring with a guide and get shown how to basically go through the whole process from shot right through to carcass preparation.
I mean, is it true to say that if you go on a Basque DSC 1 course, you'll probably find somebody who will give you some ground or take you out? Or, have you got anecdotes where that has worked, or is it not as simple as say that?
There's no guarantee, I'm afraid. But one thing I'd like to do is develop mentoring within the stalking community and get more people, experienced stalkers, to take on young stalkers and mentor them through. So it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I've done a lot. I've been involved in training all my life and getting young people involved. And my last mentor is now working as a professional stalker in Scotland. So mentee is now working as a professional stalker in Scotland. So I'd like to see more of us doing that. And it's really trying to figure out how we can expand that so that we all start taking younger people out. Certainly, if you're going to shoot a fallow, it's far easier if you've got somebody else to help drag it out.
If you want mentoring, then who do you call? Do you call your Basque regional office right now? Is that the best way in?
Well, it's something that we're looking at in terms of how we can encourage people to get involved in mentoring youngsters. Yeah.
Neil, north of the border, are you doing anything differently there that would work for us in England?
I think the only thing I'd throw in there to begin with, Charlie, is that my feeling with this, an awful lot was causing this discussion are policymakers. High up the tree, and people are supposedly in a democracy, people are cascading down on us visions of too many deer and impacts on the land. And these policymakers need to start thinking about how we practically deliver things. And if training doesn't meet the standards, if they're suddenly saying that DMQ level 2 isn't enough, then DMQ level 3 better come across quickly, and they better support it. And before they spend millions of pounds of taxpayers' money charging about the forests at the dead of night with thermals and spotlights, let's look at opportunities where an audience like this can get actively involved in managing deer. Perhaps it would make more sense to support the people processing and selling venison than it would be to put a price tag on the head of an animal for someone out there at night. And this is where I think we have to go. As far as opportunity goes, I think most people that are involved in the deer sector are pretty good at encouraging people, and I agree on the mentoring thing. And most of the people I know that are professional deer stalkers will have almost a small army of helpers. In my time with the Forestry Commission, what I tried to start there was embedding with full-time rangers helpers. So you had maybe 10 or 12 helpers, and no matter how good that ranger is, if he's in 12 places at once, he's an awful lot more effective. And I believe with government, particularly where we are at the moment, that collectively solutions are better than problems. To go back to them and say, we hear you, but we think this is a solution.
I have heard you express the, frankly, socialist view that we should open up the whole of the Forestry Commission to the public to allow them to go public land hunting like they do in America. Do you still hold that view?
I wouldn't say it's a socialist view. I mean, there's people here that want
Block
to be able
the exits, don't let him out.
They want to be able to go to the dentist and get a filling without having to wait 2 years. They want to have proper education for their kids and decent road policing. So somebody needs to tell me why, when there's a whole army of volunteers prepared to cull deer, that we aren't actually taking advantage of that and spending the money wisely. If that's socialist, then I'm a socialist.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew it all along. Okay, these are some of the things we can do with deer. Can we look a little bit longer term? It seems to me that the conservation industry want to stamp out 3 species from the uplands: the deer, the sheep, and the gamekeeper. And if they do that, they will achieve an aim. So from a landowner point of view, your landowners are kind of facing a choice here. Do we fall in with this conservation industry vision of our open lands, or do we continue doing what we're doing? That is not popular and appears not to be popular at government level either. What's the direction of travel, Mark?
Well, I think the starting premise might be slightly different in that if we actually understand the benefits of conservation that comes from people on the ground, and that can be in terms of eyes and ears on the ground, it can be in terms of the actual understanding of the impact on those measures that government want us to achieve. So if government want us to achieve more biodiversity and more carbon sequestering and more just habitat management rather than farming and production of food, then the control of deer and the management of deer comes into that in a positive way. And that is where I think maybe government can help us do more research and more understanding of the costs of not doing this. And when it comes down to gamekeepers in the countryside or in the environment, they are the ones that understand what's going on. They're the ones.
That's a red line for you. So look, government, this is we need the estate staff. It needs to work like that.
It comes down to you can't do any of these things without people managing it, and you can't. I mean, one of the benefits of this wider discussion is, rather than some of the rangers and the gamekeepers being seen as a cost, they actually are people who are helping us manage and improve the returns on the rest of the estate, in that if you can take down the impact from deer where you want that impact lower, then you can produce more food. If you can reduce the impact of those deer on the new environmental schemes, then you actually get a better return from those environmental schemes as well. And it's about measuring those results.
And this is going to be a way to alleviate the concerns of the conservation industry that the people who currently live in the countryside are the problem, that the deer are the problem, and that the sheep are the problem. If you get rid of those, that will stop them from thinking that.
Yeah. Thinking in extremes about getting rid of things just misunderstands the problem and the solution. You've got to have all of those things together and appreciate where, even the government's food strategy or transition strategy for farming talks about intensification of food production in some locations, and that might be entirely right. And we need to understand in each bit of the landscape where those different things are going to work, and then how you achieve them.
Do you agree with that structure, Neil? Do you see that kind of thing working, where people, the estate workers, are at the heart of it and can be sold as the heart of it, where deer as a food source, venison as a food source, can be sold to government as an important part of what we do in the countryside?
I think that the problem in an awful lot of it is that it's sweeping solutions, complex problems. An awful lot of the uplands of Scotland, I think there are different schools of thought. I mean, some of the heather moorland that you'll hear people describe as sheep-wrecked. Other people look at it like Dr. James Fenton and actually say this is a very healthy montane environment. An awful lot of areas that have been heavily damaged by grazing. It didn't happen last year. It didn't just happen with deer in the last 25 years. If you go back to some of the areas on the west coast, there were millions of sheep. And even in the Highlands of Scotland now, we're talking about 380 or 400,000 red deer. There's still nearly 6 million sheep in the area. But 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were way more than that. And these habitats take longer to recover. And I think there's an awful lot of, again, the art of the possible. And I think people play an important part of this, because a lot of the changes in landscape, the length and breadth of this small island, our ancestors inflicted on it. And sensible change will come by practical management. And in biodiversity terms, there will be winners and losers. And nobody at the moment has said, in biodiversity terms, what is more valuable, a golden eagle or a million chaffinches? Because you change habitats, you change structures of habitats, you change the species that utilise them, there will be winners and losers. And the other important factor in selling this to government is that we're all trying to cover big swathes of this country in trees and species of trees. The pace of climate change, we don't even know if they'll succeed. It's a huge investment, and maybe 40 years' time we're proven wrong. So we need to think and how we do this and move forward sensibly with deliverable targets. And at the moment there's too much passion and not enough science.
So you do back the science, even though it is in some ways science that's being turned against your
There's a
view.
little bit of the Groucho Marx thing at the moment, isn't it? If you don't like my statistics, I have others. And I think that it keeps bringing it back to the art of the possible. There's a lot of skilled people sat in front of us here. And we're all part of the human race, and this is our home. We don't have a second Earth to go to. And what we want to do is care for it, but we need to be able to live on it. And I think the climate is changing, the way the habitats adapt is changing. And I totally support what we're saying, let's move forward progressively, but we need to feed our people, and we need to try and do the best with the habitats and climate that we can.
So the food argument stands,
Yes.
we can use that. One of the things we don't particularly like is fast change in the countryside. Culturally, we change quite slowly. Are we capable of keeping pace with how the urban Britain wants to see us?
I think the big advantage we have at the moment, and I'm probably interrupting the other guys, is that the time for talking is almost over. The time for doing is now. And that's why I think I would urge everybody here, come forward with solutions and evidence-based those solutions. If you can show people recovering habitats, if you can show them species doing better, if you can show them increased biodiversity and food production, then it's really difficult for them to say, field sports doesn't fit, traditional farming doesn't fit, because you can evidence it fits.
Martin, Basque's role in this?
Well, Neil's certainly right. There isn't one-size-fits-all solution. And deer are not a national problem. As I said, there's many parts of the country where deer are being very well managed currently with no issues whatsoever. There are hotspots where there are certain species, certain locations causing particular problems that we need to get on top of. But deer are not a national problem, and it's really trying to find the right solution model for that particular situation. And it's got to be, and as I say, the two problem species in England, the fallow and muntjac, and they need different solutions. Fallow are operating at a landscape scale. We need collaboration between neighbours. We need much better cooperation between landowners, stalkers, everybody involved, so there's no place for these large herds of fallow to sort of find sanctuary.
Niall, I was taking the tram out to the Edinburgh airport the other day, and I have never seen so many roe out in the field. There were more than 7 per field. And I've heard you in the past say that in that situation, in the central belt where there's a lot of housing, it's quite difficult to use a rifle. Maybe we should reintroduce bow hunting, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but the British Bow Hunters Association is here somewhere. Can you develop that idea a little bit, or particularly not so much bow hunting, but these alternative solutions? What else can we possibly be looking at, and are they acceptable to government?
I think primarily for the public at large, and I don't like using that term, it's actually getting the message across that deer need to be controlled. And not only that they're a very useful source of protein. And if people can understand that they share this landscape with us, and for our success they need to be managed, then we have to look at alternatives of how that can be done. And there's probably some people in the room that are not in favour of bow hunting. I use it, not in Europe, but when I'm in North America and Africa, part of what we do is we support and guide people bow hunting. What I would say is it's properly trained, and this is a great part of everything we've said today. It's a very competent and lethal piece of equipment, particularly some of these modern compound bows. But it means that the practitioner, has to aspire to reach that higher standard, because it's a different method of culling an animal, and accuracy and competence with it is vital. But in an urban area, some of the areas we're in America, you're very close to human habitation, and you're in a tree stand and nobody either sees you or hears you, and other deer round about aren't even aware of what's going on. So it has a role, but I think truthfully, Charlie, we have a big jump from where we're sat now to the society that we're part of, embracing that as a practical tool for people to use.
But we have seen this year, Scotland is adopting night shooting. It's taking away the season for stags. I think that's coming up, is that right?
I think, to my opinion, that's for different reasons. I struggle. That you can say from an animal welfare point of view, there isn't the science to say that you should have a closed season for males. But I think the potential for an enormous socioeconomic impact on the land use is probably more the reasoning behind it. I don't think the science backs up the necessity. In some of the early debates I got involved in this, the position that I quite openly took is if you want people to cull more females, then look at how they've brought in the sporting rates, and perhaps if you achieve your target hind cull, you're relieved of any sporting rates for male deer. But to purely focus on males isn't going to control any population. So the potential for socioeconomic disaster, particularly in rural Highland Scotland, is enormous.
Well, that seemed to me to be a policy decision that was based on nonsense, really. And what were they thinking?
How blunt do we want to be? If you want rid of Highland sporting estates, remove the statutory closed season of male deer. Unfortunately, people will exploit this opportunity. And I think from the thermal and night shooting point of view, some of the technology is incredible, but we need best practice. We need training, we need standards, and this is an opportunity for the sector, for the hunting and stalking and shooting sector, to demonstrate best practice now and say, yes, we hear you, But when we cull sentient mammals, all sentient mammals at night, this is how we will do it.
Mark, some of this stuff would horrify a traditional landowner, I think, but the face of landowning is changing as well, and we're seeing more corporates coming in, more planting of trees for carbon credits. Niall has made the point in the past that this desire to eradicate deer in order to plant forestry is going to produce perfect habitat for deer. How do you advise your clients in that context, and do you still see squeamishness over things like no season for stags?
Yeah, no, I mean, the whole piece about corporates coming in with ESG money, effectively environmental, social and government funds, I think will again push us in different directions. We all have a job to do to explain how beneficial this bit of the estate management is in the whole piece, and that actually if the main aim of that corporation is to sequester carbon, then you can't do that if the trees don't grow. And actually you can do it quicker if the trees grow better. So I don't think it's about pinpointing it as an issue. It's about making this part of that. How do you achieve what you want to achieve? From an estate manager's point of view, in terms of the other technologies and the other practices that might come in, I think that's much more about best practice and standards. We understand when we're doing shooting licenses or stalking licenses that you can be asking for DS2, DS3, etc. And it's knowing what that standard is going to be that you can then accredit your staff, your shooters against. So it's about certainty.
So your new landowners are coming in who don't necessarily have a background in the countryside and the kind of things we're talking about. Do you have to educate them into? Yeah, I went to a Carter Jonas seminar at Exeter, and somebody described the new estate owner from North Cornwall who asked how much he'd have to pay people to shoot his pheasants. I thought that was wonderful. I like that idea.
Well, do you want me to introduce him to you, sir?
Everybody surged forward. Yeah, I mean the new landowner and I mean, how much of your work is involved with that? How much of the countryside are they soaking up at the moment? Or do we broadly still have a traditional landowner heartland in the UK?
Yeah, no, the change and the discussions about change, so those new entrants into the marketplace of owning land, it's what grabs attention, but of course in numbers it's a relatively small part of the overall marketplace. But actually, part of the reason that they want into that marketplace is a lot of the tradition. So they come at it from perhaps a different viewpoint.
They want the money. They want the money from planting trees, don't they?
Yeah. Yes, it's one of their reasons for doing it. But I come back to us all being able to explain, that's what you want to achieve, and to do it, you have to do it like this. There are areas of woodland that are being watered for the first couple of years, and it's not just a question of banging the trees in the ground and off they go. There are discussions about the costs of the tree guards, and are you going to go green with the tree guards, or are you going to accept that there's probably a cost to collecting plastic tree guards after a few years in order to get the whole thing away? So there's lots of nuances, and actually what you often find is the new estate owners are focused on the end result, and they are much more willing, in a way, to leave us as professionals and estate managers to get on with the how you get there, and actually writing all these things into the policies at the start is part of our responsibility to make it all work.
Okay, I've got the wonderful opportunity of both the Labour EFRA Minister coming on the stage this morning, and tomorrow Therese Coffey, the DEFRA Secretary of State, coming on the stage. So I'm playing a little game of what should I ask her, and I've got various answers on various different subjects, but can I go round the panel, starting with you, Martin? What should I ask them about deer? What should I be saying to them to put them on the spot as well?
So if the government want us to shoot more deer, which they do in England and in Scotland, how are they going to actually incentivise us to do that? At the moment, there is you can get £90 a hectare for a woodland management grant to manage your deer, but it barely pays my time to get out there. So if they need to either subsidise the venison market or they need to get some money into the deer sector to incentivise the deer managers to get out there and shoot more deer.
Could they argue that they can do without the recreational deer stalker or the sort of sub-pro deer stalker and just bring in what they refer to in government as marksmen?
Where from? Where are they? How? They haven't got the people out there to do that. They need the voluntary deer manager as well as the professional deer manager. The reality is, in some places, you might need a professional culler contractor to achieve a reduction cull and get the numbers down to a certain level, but that isn't sustainable. You can't keep that going forever. So you're still going to need somebody once they've got the deer down to a certain level where the trees will grow. Then you need somebody on the ground to manage the deer on a more permanent basis, and that's where the voluntary deer manager comes in.
Certainly true.
There's room for us all.
When they wanted badger contractors, they came to us, didn't they? But can you project your idea forward a little bit and say, right, in 5 years' time, let's say everything goes right for us and for deer, what would you like to see the UK countryside look like for deer?
We're certainly going to have plenty of deer because that is the nature of the animal. They reproduce, and we're going to have to continue to manage them. In certain areas, we're going to have to accept a lower population. So, as a recreational stalker, you may not shoot as many deer per outing, or your success rate may be reduced. You'll be going out more times for fewer deer. But the reality is that we're always going to need to control deer in the countryside, and there's going to be lots of opportunity for us to do that.
Sounds like we're going to be more or less where we are now, but if you were to put into place your incentivisation schemes, let's say you were the DEFRA secretary, what would you do to create this world for 5 years' time?
I think that ideally we'd get some sort of help with the venison market, some serious help with the venison market, so that we are incentivised to particular species, so fallow and females, so we can get the fallow population under control where we need to, and people are getting a good revenue for the work they're putting into it.
Mark, what should I be asking?
So for us, it's right at the beginning of the process. It's greater funding of creating a management plan, and that
sounds a little bit like paying for Carter Jonas.
Well, possibly. We'd be very happy to quote for the work, I suppose, is the answer for that. But the more serious point is that for a lot of farmers, a lot of people who actually manage the land, it's the cost of the entry point that's important. Once you get a plan in place, once you get the people in place, once you've got a product coming out, even though maybe there's not a natural return for it, those things have a life of their own. But starting the project when you know that the beginning of the project is going to cost your business money today and probably this year and next year, that is the key point where people need help.
And where will that get us?
That will get us a landscape which has properly thought out plans across it, with hopefully encouragement for those plans to be linked up rather than independent of each other. And there are already lots of discussions and schemes that are in place that are going in that direction. But where it will get us is a more professional approach, an approach that has more information and science within it, because it will have more evidence, and it will have more deer being managed in a better way over time.
Okay, and room for mistakes. I mean, plans are not necessarily perfect, they're just plans, aren't they?
Any plan is only as good as its first engagement, isn't it? So, and so the other point there is, in terms of measuring it, measuring the impacts and the change in impacts. I think it's very difficult to calculate those things, but the impact on food production and the impact on the success of our ecological planting areas is greatly affected by trampling and grazing in different quantities at different times of the year, and it's measuring those things and getting results from it.
Neil, the countryside is so unimportant to government, it was devolved whereas they hung on to things like defence and treasury. So we're in an unusual position of having many different environment departments around the countryside. But if you could direct your attention at England, what should I be saying to Daniel and Therese?
See, I was asked for three things. Integrated regional land management plans.
What's that mean?
What it means is every element of activity from forestry, farming, agriculture, field sports and biodiversity development all sing off the same hymn sheet.
So taking what Mark said and
drive these things together. I would do that as a regional thing. I fully support the comments on underpinning a venison market. If you want to mobilise this nation, make venison valuable, they wouldn't be sitting talking to us just now, they'd be out there shooting deer. And you might actually need to slow them down rather than speed them up.
Well, Martin was talking yesterday about the Wild Venison Assurance Scheme, which I think is an important part of that, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, Neil.
And the other thing I would say, replace this current furore around carbon credits with biodiversity credits. Biodiversity credits are things that we can deliver on that are quantifiable and they're easier to interpret in the pace of climate change than this current carbon thing, which I think at the moment is fraught with snake oil salesmen.
Well, wouldn't biodiversity credits have the same problem? I mean, aren't you doubling down on an already bad idea?
No, because I think it's easier to benchmark these things. Whereas staring blankly into the peatlands of the far north of Scotland saying it will look like this in a millennia there's an awful lot of good luck and guessing going on there.
So it is literally about saying where we are now and where we can get to, and rather than saying we'll have this many tons of timber if it doesn't burst into flames before 2050.
It strikes me as amusing, but it's conscience salving when you're driving down the M6 or across Scotland on the M8 to cast your eyes to the north and think we're sequestering carbon there, guys, so we're okay.
Can we just get this good? Because I mean the deer story is totally wrapped up with the tree story. Can I just ask you about the carbon credits, Mark? It must be a very important part of, if not your landers and Carter Jonas's market, really.
Yeah, from various different bits of that puzzle. But I think the biggest question mark in the carbon world at the moment is price. So, and I don't have all of the numbers right in the front of my brain, but at £25 a tonne, people are going into the market in I'll try it and I'll see how it goes. And therefore, some of the newer schemes that are out there that you only have to sign up to for a year are actually quite attractive to people at the moment. But it's not because it's the best thing since sliced bread, it's because they can come out of it if they want to. I've seen a new scheme at the moment that takes the price of a carbon unit from £25 up to £100 per tonne, deliverable to the farmer, and that I think becomes a game changer because of the impact that has on your budgeting. So for a farm of 400 acres where the carbon's going to give you £5,000-6,000 a year, that's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it's not a game changer for your business. When you get to £20,000-25,000 as a line on your income sheet, that becomes much more meaningful and something to be genuinely interested in.
Something you would go for. I was talking to two foresters in Wick a couple of months ago, and they claimed, we hadn't had much to drink, but they claimed it was £1,000 per hectare that their landowners were clearing. Obviously they had to buy the land in the first place, but they also pointed out some of those landowners were able to persuade people to crowdfund the land, so they got free land and then £1,000 a hectare. So that's £1 million per 1,000 hectares, or 10 million per 10,000 hectares.
Yeah, I mean the numbers become mind-boggling, don't they? But
are they true? Is that true?
Well, I don't know is the answer for that particular example. The other side of it is how we deliver carbon at scale. So, I think there's a massive place for people to aggregate, because the carbon requirement side is in tens of thousands, tens of million tonnes each requirement, and our ability to deliver that is at best piecemeal. And so I think the carbon trading is the Wild West of the marketplace at the moment, and there's a long way to go before we really get there.
Would you be more comfortable with biodiversity credits, as Niall has put forward?
Well, it's an interesting piece. We could probably spend the next half an hour talking about biodiversity credits, but The government have given us a measuring stick for biodiversity through the biodiversity net gain calculator. It is far from perfect and it's easy to criticise, but it is a measuring stick which everybody can apply in the same way, and it part of what we believe will happen over the next 5 years is a movement in that marketplace. So as developers start to buy biodiversity net gain units, and the government came out this week and gave us a price for a statutory credit, so that again helps us understand the marketplace. But as developers in the BNG world start buying those units, corporates and funds will start looking at the price being paid for that asset, and they will start saying, well, can we turn that into a unit that any farmer can provide, and can we actually purchase that? Can we accredit that? So it's a very interesting piece of thinking that is being developed by us and others right at the moment.
We had Max Richardson from Investec, which has a stand over there, yesterday, talking about the weight of money available for this kind of scheme. He said $4 trillion a year is now available for this kind of scheme. Neil, when you put that amount of money into something where deer is obviously the bad guy, that can't be good for deer, can it?
Well, again, it's about perception, and I think if they become a main sort of staple to people's diet, that'll anchor them. When they're seen as a component of a healthy ecosystem, that'll anchor them. And what it will do, if we're sensible as a sector, it'll secure people in the countryside, because it's about delivering. And the thing about biodiversity credits that I like is that there's a potential there to engage with people to deliver sustainability and improvement. And the management of natural resources will be a key component of that.
Sorry, they're also a very visible part of the biodiversity within any landscape.
Totally.
And it's sometimes quite difficult to get excited about the greater spotted left-footed caterpillar because you can't see it. But the deer that people see are much easier to engage with.
I'm sure Neil can find a way of having it mounted on your wall. I'm sure he'll think of something. For the second part, I have two guests on the stage. Top venison chef José Souto and Bedfordshire-based deer manager and sporting agent Paul Childerley.
The whole thing about venison and basically getting chefs to use more venison and even the retailers to use more venison is to basically, number one, to assure that it's safe, that what we're using. Non-toxic is basically a big thing at the moment, with a lot of supermarkets to ensure that part of it. Also, I think the educational side of it, of basically educating young chefs about it as a quality product. I mean, we've done a lot of work at the college. I mean, Paul's been to the college, he's seen what we're doing there. And we've done a lot of work to try and present venison as the fourth meat, and we've, over the last 2 years, with some of the work we've done with Highland Game and Lincolnshire Game, they've helped us be able to basically put venison in a position where the kids are using it for their exams and for their synoptic exams that they do, and throughout the year. So by doing that, and also by teaching the first years all the way through to the third years about venison and basically placing it as this fourth meat, so they've got the idea of it. And the more kudos we can give it with this scheme, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
For those who don't know the amazingly attractive and charming Paul Childerley, he is the man appearing in the film behind us, stalking the buck that you two will be breaking down in the Basque Wild Venison Theatre tomorrow. Is that right? Yes? No?
Sort of.
Not quite.
Not quite. What's the true story? What were you doing?
Like normal, you asked me to do the near enough impossible. Taking out, obviously, somebody out trying to stalk roe deer, early rut in tall crops in the rain. But no, it was another challenge which was set, which we did over 2 outings. The first was successful, and then when José come down, we were unsuccessful with actually bagging an animal. But I blame David and José catching up.
You blame David the cameraman. We all blame David.
Was
the
it
cameraman.
not David size 9s that he's made?
This is the film that's running in the background. All right, so you did get the buck. You will be breaking down a buck tomorrow and on Sunday, 1:20 p.m. in the theatre. Going back to the wild venison insurance scheme, Paul, first of all, I mean, have you come across it? Is it part of your life as a professional deer stalker?
It's not yet.
It should be, or it shouldn't. Do you support it or not? What do you think?
Personally, I don't need it for how I manage my estates and farms.
Is that because you're not selling into the supermarket chains? Is that why?
Yeah, basically. So we're mostly dealing with smaller animals like the muntjac and Chinese, and it is the game dealer's sort of like nemesis. Small animal, not much meat-bone ratio. So it's been a difficult sell in anyone's managing a wild deer. About probably 5-6 years ago, there was a bit of a problem with muntjac and Chinese of pricing. I think it was either 50p a kilo or 50p an animal. And I decided we weren't actually going to sell any more to the game dealers, so we broke everything down ourselves. Last year we done 700 Chinese, and we broke them all down ourselves and sold them locally. So yeah, it's quite an achievement, I think.
See, this is very interesting to me, the adoption of things like a new wild venison insurance scheme. So José's obviously in favour of it, works for his students even though they're not necessarily involved in supermarkets. For you it's irrelevant, and so you sort of see how these things roll out. Can I also ask you a question for the gentleman over there about Scottish seasons, which doesn't affect you in Bedfordshire though? It is a question. Can you see a version of events where we get rid of the season for bucks in England, or if we carry on down this path of thinking too many?
Big sigh, really, for me. For England, I would personally say deer management is deer management, and if you can do it properly, you don't need to go out of the seasons. Period.
You criticising the Scots?
No, I'm English.
It's such a tightrope. José, on the subject of lamping deer, is that good for the deer generally, or you just feel it doesn't work for you?
Like Paul, I think we don't need to do it down here. It goes against the grain for me. I don't know, maybe it's because as a deer stalker, basically being brought up, I mean, I'm of a certain age where basically we've been told that's wrong, so maybe that's why it goes against the grain. I also feel that with certain deer species, if you put too much pressure on them, fallow, a classic example of it, even during the day, you put too much pressure on them, they go nocturnal, and they become very, very difficult, very fidgety and all that sort of stuff. Whereas if you're classically stalking them as we are, I mean, let's make no bones about this, we have the best venison in the world. And the reason we have the best venison in the world, and compared to anybody else in Europe, is because we stalk our venison. And our venison is basically animals that are relaxed, they're shot, and once they're shot, basically they're bred, they're grollocked, they're put through the food chain, and they are quality carcasses. If you go to abroad, to Spain, Italy, basically any of the Eastern Bloc countries, a lot of the animals are basically shot on the run. So because the animals are shot on the run, the lactic acid within those animals, makes the meat very tough. I mean, I've got chefs from Spain that will come and see me, and they'll come over and I'll serve a piece of venison loin or a piece of venison haunch, and they'll go, oh my God, that's so tender. Whereas we have to stew everything. And the reason they have to stew everything is because of the way it's shot. So what we need to do is promote it more, get down the educational side. I also feel that basically we sometimes we need to get around this thing that basically painting deer as the enemy, especially with the tree thing, obviously, they're eating trees, they're doing the damage in the trees. But if we want more people to eat venison, what we need to do is basically explain it to them. Explain basically that it's a natural harvest, it's a natural animal, its carbon footprint is better than beef, in basically a lot of places. We've got, companies and associations now that are looking at that. They're looking at basically that a lot of their beef dishes have a very high carbon footprint. If they want to bring their carbon footprint down, if they take 4 beef dishes and basically swap them for venison, they're doing that, so it's a great story that we have in venison, and we have this slow take-up on it. We have the NHS. I've been doing a load of work with the NHS with Highland Game, and we've been basically putting venison into the NHS. Why? Because it's protein's great on it. It's basically repairs the body really well. It's a great quality product that has very low in fat. So the story's there to do. It's just the education taken further.
We have the Country Food Trust here later on in the weekend who do exactly this with venison and give it to food banks, and it's a system that works amazingly well. Paul, for your home herd, so to speak, your deer on your ground in Bedfordshire, which, as you say, mainly muntjac and Chinese water deer, what would happen to them if you started lamping them?
They'll die.
This is why I love having Paul up here. He just makes life so clear.
No, seriously.
They're not the most taxing of deer.
No, I mean you don't really need to night shoot Chinese water deer. They're a very visual species. Muntjac, you probably. I mean, when I say manage deer, I mean manage it to the landowner or the area that needs managing. So if your landowner's happy with seeing lots of deer, obviously you can have a high number, do your management plan and have a good healthy stock, and you've got lots of deer around. But if you've got a minimal deer number on the estate that they want to go for, no deer policy, then obviously any legal method is the best way, and then if it doesn't work, then obviously you have to look at other ways, and if that is to protect crops or livelihoods, then it's got to be done. As long as it's humane and done properly, then
So you could do it. I mean, I think I'm picturing you as a professional stalker who's taking people out after good quality animals, and what Jose is saying is if you put that much pressure on them at night, you stop getting good quality animals. You put them under too much stress for the quality to exist, or is that not your experience?
Yeah, I mean, you push fallow too hard, they move. They go to where the sanctuaries where it's quiet. I think probably for Jose's side of it, you haven't got probably as good a quality at the end if you're doing stuff at night because people are tired, you're shooting numbers, so that side of it a little bit maybe.
Do you feel that you've got a need to do it?
Personally, no. But if I had an area which was sensitive, again, with a lot of people, and you need to do it, there's no right or wrong, really. Everything has to be done for the right reason and in the right area, and then get the same result, but, so everyone's happy and keep a happy medium.
Right, thank you for your answers. Thank you very much, sir, for your question. That was an interesting one. Going back to the subject which I started with Martin just before you came on, this idea that there are too many deer. This idea that there are 2 million deer, which is the number of noughts is directly proportional to the unbelievability of the number. So
what's too many deer?
Well, what do you subscribe to this? Are you falling in with this idea, or no? Are there a lot of deer around at the moment?
I have this argument every year, not argument, discussion, and it's normally discussion when I'm paying my rents. And we had a coal target of 500 deer on about just under 2,000 acres of just Chinese water deer, and we agreed. That was the number we were going to take. Got to 500, and there's still a few too many deer around. And I said, right, we can take another 100, no problem at all. But it will all reflect in the rent next year. And the answer was, should we move them round a bit more? Because the damage they're doing is far less than the rent I'm paying. So I think every situation is different, and there are areas that need to be a non-deer area, but there are areas that can sustain a lot more. So I think each estate should be assessed and keep deer going.
Keep deer moving. Jose, what do you think about this debate, this characterisation of this debate?
I straddle both sides of the wall. I'm a stalker. I do a lot of deer management on this just estate where that gentleman shoots as well, and I also manage another estate, and I feel that basically, you're looking at numbers. Obviously, you assess your ground. You know how many you've got to take off, so that you've got a happy medium of. You're not annihilating them. You're wanting to keep them at a happy medium because that's not the thing here. That we've got 6 deer species where we only have 2, so we need to basically do that. And I keep saying to people, I've always wanted to present it to people that are not into venison and not into shooting, and say to people why we do what we do. And present basically deer management in a way that people can understand it. It's far too easy to basically sort of say, right, we need to kill 500, 600, 700. We need to basically take all these out, and then people then who might side with you will actually go against you. So we have to present it in a way that basically it's a natural cull. a certain amount of animals need to come off. They need to be put into the food chain, yeah. It's a natural product to eat. We're growing a demand for the product, basically for Paul's product and all those things. And Paul's, you know, the Chinese water deer and muntjac, right, will come into the fold at some point, right? Because, especially within the hospitality world, because where chefs have been selective about what they use, they also want provenance on the menu. And that gives them sort of an answer or ammunition to basically sell product on the menu. If they can say it comes from, you know, Bedford estate, from Paul's estate, it's Chinese water deer, you know, you're giving them all that information on the menu. And that's what chefs need to understand that. Within the retail side, it's a bit more difficult because you don't want a supermarket basically saying, right, we only want fallow. Because then what happens is at certain times of the year when obviously there's no fallow in season, they have to take it off the shelf, yeah? Or you have to replace it with something else, which then the customer comes in, it's something that they don't recognise. So then they're a bit, oh, is it going to be the same as what I bought before?
So it's a sort of two-speed education, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, hospitality and retail are completely different.
They are, yeah.
But retail, hospitality, there's a massive market in hospitality for Chinese water deer and muntjac. You know, and if you look at places like the Ledbury in London, you know, the Ledbury was basically using a lot of Chinese water deer and a lot of muntjac because that suited their menus.
What I loved about the course I attended that you were holding at Westminster Kingsway is you broke down a hare in front of what looked like some fairly bald teenagers until you told them that this creates, I can't remember the numbers, it's 9 cuts, and each of those cuts will sell for £40 retail, and they're going 9 times 40 is one hare.
We do that.
£360.
Yeah, we do that with a deer as well. I mean, so basically, my first years come in the first year. So it's a 3-year program for my chefs. So they come in the first year. In the first year, basically, they're taught about sort of how to cook and they're taught about how to use the equipment. And then what we try to do is give them a little bit of provenance on each individual animal, and venison's in there. So we're teaching them about what the 6 deer species are and explaining to them what the cuts are on an animal. Then they go into the second year. In the second year, they're into our restaurants and they're working in the kitchens in the restaurants. So then they're preparing the joints of the animal and using those joints and understanding basically how to cook it. In the third year, we then take the third year groups and I'll do a whole roe deer with each of the individual third year groups. So you've got basically about 6 kids and each one of them gets it from field to table. So we have, you know, I've got my own deer larder in London. I'm the only college in the UK that has its own deer larder apart from obviously the gamekeeper colleges, but I'm a catering college, so I'm different. So I can take up to about 6 carcasses in there at a time, and we have about 25 to 30 carcasses come in throughout the year, whole, with the heads on, feet on, the whole thing. We tell them all about basically from selecting an animal, why, all the way through to chop placement, bleeding, grollicking, fidget protocols, how it affects the meat, and breaking down the carcass, and also giving them a pound by pound basically breakdown how much money can be made on a carcass for an individual chef, yeah, if he's clever about what he does with the carcass. So what that does is, but what we're doing is we're breeding chefs that want game. You know, not only venison, we're doing this with game birds as well. And this year, for the first time at Westminster, the partridges will go on our synoptic test for our third years. So that's the first time ever that's happened, right? And we've managed to do it. We've managed to do it with the game, with Lincolnshire Games' help. We've managed to basically put that onto the curriculum. So that means that these guys will be using it. We're the only college doing that, you know, and it's because I personally, it's one of my challenges, right, to get out there and get these guys in years to come. It's a slow burn, right, because these guys are going out into the industry every year, that they understand that product, and then they'll want Paul's product. Yeah, they'll want the product basically that's out there. They'll understand it better and know how to cook it.
It's brilliant. I mean, I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing. I am worried one day I'll be in a restaurant and a waiter will lean over and say, "This venison was shot by Mr. Childerley, sir." I'm worried about that. But, you know, but maybe it'll be a kind of Childerley assurance scheme of your very own. Paul, you're breaking down an animal tomorrow with José, is that right? You're both doing it together? No?
I'm just sat at the end.
You're just sat at the end, okay. All right.
So me and JB Gill are breaking down.
Oh, okay. Goodness me, you're breaking down a deer with a pop star. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I've done it a few
Gill
times.
From JLS and José are breaking down a deer. That's magnificent. Wonderful.
But Paul's going to come and talk about it and talk about obviously the stalk, the equipment we use on the stalk, obviously, you know, and what he does and what's important about deer stalking. It's great to get his perspective on it and basically what you know, deer management and basically on that sort of side, which we've never had in the Den Theatre before. So it's going to be great having him there.
So just talk through what you're going to give us a preview of what you're going to say tomorrow, Paul. Equipment you use. How does the stalking process work? It's a different order. Come on, this is rehearsal. This is good for you.
What, on that stalk or?
Well, that stalk is interesting. I mean, we still have the animal that one of the animals I think you shot is in the frame behind us.
Yeah, actually, that was a 308. We were out on the 308 that night. The 90, the new one out, Seiko 90. First time I used a rifle, zeroed it in, and
Controversially, a neck shot.
Why is it controversial?
Well, because we get a lot of best practice on YouTube, which I absolutely with. And one of the things they get a bit worried about is neck shots, and they prefer to see a heart shot.
When we've talked about this before in the Dem Theatre, basically, and for years, basically, we've done these demos in Dem Theatre with them, and I always say to people, if you are a recreational stalker that goes out sort of like once a month or 3-4 times a year, take a body shot, because basically it's safe for that. You're talking about a professional
I
there,
know.
You're
Exactly,
talking about a guy
right.
that's basically does it a lot. Yeah, Paul's a very proficient shooter. And if in the where the deer was, I mean, there's no way you could have taken a body shot. I mean, the neck shot is the safe shot to take in there. The other thing about obviously with deer like that is the equipment you're using. You have to have 100% trust in the rifle that you're using. And the new Seiko 90, I mean, is a beautiful bit of kit. I've used Seiko rifles all my life and all my stalking life. I've got an old 75, which I absolutely love, and people have told me to get rid of, but my son's just shot his first roebuck with it, so I'm never parting with it.
Oh, that's good.
But once you trust the rifle and you know what you're doing, and you're proficient. This is the thing, is you're proficient. In this country, I think we're more worried about basically, injuring an animal or an animal running off than a lot of other countries are, right? Especially when they're in Monterias and stuff like that. So when you're proficient as he is, you know it's going to go down.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so that's what you're going to say tomorrow, Paul. Are you happy with that? Good.
Like he said.
Noted. Well done. All right, well, turn up tomorrow and listen to Jose speak Paul's words tomorrow. There you go. Just on going back to the subject of too many deer. So, is there anything we can do to kind of lessen the impact of this myth? Because I fear at the moment we have a government that is committed to trying to get rid of deer and sheep and gamekeepers from our uplands. That seems to be the three species they're after, and that will change the countryside. I like.
Yeah, I think we probably need to manage the deer a little bit harder throughout the UK and Scotland. Maybe Scotland, I'm not sure about. That's off my remit, but definitely the UK. And it's quite interesting, really. In the last 5-8 years, deer stalking, the increase has been massive. And you'd think there's more people out there with rifles now, more people doing recreational stalking. You'd think numbers would decrease, but in fact, it's increasing because people are managing the stock. They got better stock, they got better deer, they're surviving better. So you've got that counterproductive.
Basically.
So basically counterproductive, and you've got more deer. So maybe people have to maybe cull a bit more. If the venison prices would increase, the fallow population would decrease. Fact, because when there's value, there's basically people worthwhile going out shooting deer for pocket money and paying for their sport. So that's probably one thing. Maybe there should be a government, like a little bit of help out on the venison.
Government scheme for gamekeepers.
Yeah.
For venison. Okay,
Venison,
all right.
yeah. And as for gamekeepers, they rule.
Of course they do. Look, we're going to have to leave it there because we're going to go to the amazing Michael Morpurgo. But thank you very much, Paul Childerley and José Souto. Thank you.